Oh, we're on 6 o'clock, so we'll start the webinar. I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the senior members of the Tablet team this evening. My name's Amanda Davison-Young. I'm the CEO of the Tablet, and tonight we're going to be talking to Brendan, Maggie Fergusson, and Ruth Gledhill. Brendan is, of course, the editor of the Tablet. Maggie is the deputy editor, and Ruth is the digital and home news editor. And it's a very unique webinar to have all three of them together talking about a topic. We'll be offering the tablet's uniquely informed perspective on the passing of Pope Francis, the significance of this moment to the church, and the unfolding conclave, and these leading figures that we think will be emerging as the next Pope. So without further ado, less of me and more of them. Good evening, Brendan, Maggie, and Ruth. Really good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Brendan, you're going to host this event, aren't you?
I am Amanda, and thanks so much for introducing us and welcome to everybody. Amanda sets these things up every week, just about. And we also have, you might see Pippa, who is indispensable and lets everybody in. And we couldn't do this without her either. So today, welcome. It's the Feast of St. Joseph the Worker, and it's
Oh,
the sixth day of the 9 days of mourning after the death of any pope. It's that Roman tradition, I think, of 9 days of mourning that the church took over, the Novem Dies, the 9 days. And let me just introduce briefly Ruth and Maggie. Maggie is or Ruth is I think it's fair to say she's the most experienced religious affairs correspondent in Britain. She was religious affairs correspondent of the Times of London for 25 years and knows more about how this business works than anybody I know. We're so lucky to have her. And Maggie, our deputy editor and literary editor, was previously, before she joined the Tablet, she was the director of the Royal Society of Literature, and she's the author of a quite fabulous biography of George Mackay Brown, which she always reminds me is still in print and available for £12.99 from Amazon and all the best suppliers from John Murray. And we've also got amongst the people with us tonight, I know Tabitha is somewhere among you. I'm sure she's awake and paying attention. We might bring her in briefly. And the rest of the Tablet team we don't have, but we're incredibly lucky. We've got Paddy Hudson, who is about to leave for the conclave in Rome. And in Rome already, we have people like Austin Ivory, who you all know, and our regular correspondents from Rome who are feeding in their insights every day. Paddy Agnew, Julian Paparella, young academic, director of studies at the English College. Joseph Tulloch, who also works for a Vatican media. So we're well supplied with information. But what everybody always says about these conclaves is that nobody knows anything. That we've all seen the film, we've all read these long lists of papabili, but it's often said that nobody quite knows what's going to happen, which is actually one of the things later on I'm rather going to challenge, because although people always say you go into a conclave as a pope and you come out as a cardinal, in fact, most conclaves, the bookies have got it right that the favourite, more often than not, does emerge as the pope. And as we all know, bookies are very rarely seen going home on bicycles. They know their business. And it's not a bad place to start, actually, is looking at William Hill. Some of them are a bit idiosyncratic, but it's actually more reliable than professional Vaticanistas who often sneer at them say. We're all a bit tired. It's been an incredibly busy week. We'll talk a bit about that since we got this news about 10 to 9 on that Saturday morning, the 21st of April, that day when we heard the news of the Pope, about 10 to 9. I don't know if anybody here heard it earlier, but I got the first messages, WhatsApp, saying, we've heard that there's going to be an announcement in 5 or 10 minutes from the Vatican to say that the Pope has died. So just a few minutes, really, about 5 to 10 minutes. And then I had a message from Joanna Moorhead, our colleague whose husband works at the BBC. They were just checking it out. Everybody is terrified these days, particularly of announcing something, and then it turns out not to be the case. But a few minutes before it was officially announced, we kind of had these rumours, and then suddenly we swung into action. We had the news at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and the tablet goes to press every week at Tuesday at 6:30, 7 o'clock. And of course, Monday morning, the day before, our whole contents list is pretty much set for that week. And that week, 2 weeks ago, we simply tore it up and started again. So we've had a fairly exhilarating couple of weeks. So be gentle with us. We're not all Vatican experts, but we do our best, and we are close to people who do know what they're talking about. So if sometimes what we say, maybe we've got things wrong or we're not quite right, as I say, we're not setting out to know everything about every detail of the process. I'm quite sure that in our list of papabili, which we've got in the paper this week, we spent a lot of time and effort on it, but we might have left one or two people out. I'm not sure, but I'm getting a screen. I hope you can all still hear me and see me. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about how the conclave works. We're going to talk a little bit about what kind of Pope we think the church and the world needs. We're all going to say a little bit about that. And as I said, we're also going to give you a little bit of background and insight into how the media covers things like this. And this is where I'll bring in Ruth briefly. I know Ruth was telling us that she's never actually been at a funeral or a conclave, but just some insight into how all those years ago the Times covered the conclave, and how her memories of how we did it at 2005, 2013 or earlier, if you can go back that far. So Ruth,
Thanks, Brendan.
what are your memories of papal funerals and the scramble for his replacement?
Well, Pope John Paul II was obviously extremely ill for quite a long time. And so we had plenty of time to put plans in place for when he eventually died. And at his funeral, Benedict, then Joseph Ratzinger, gave a very, very rousing and interesting and important address. And so he was one of those who kind of did go into the conclave a pope and came out a pope. He didn't come out a cardinal. Nevertheless, I remember very strongly, because he was known to be a conservative and someone who would kind of not relax the strong conservative papacy of John Paul II, but kind of double down on it. There was this big attempt from the growing numbers of progressives in the church and the world to try and tip it the other way. So a lot of political and lobbying went on, and the bookies were all over the place then, and so it wasn't seen as a done deal that he would emerge as Pope. But and I mean, I remember, I was finding it very difficult from London to try and follow. And we did have people in Rome, but I spoke to a journalist who was over in Rome. And he said, yes, it's very clearly going the way of Benedict, and he was right. Then when it came to the election of Francis Bergoglio, well, no, very few people, if anybody, was expecting him. However, I've got a slight confession to make here. Again, people didn't really know what was going to happen, and it felt much more open than the Benedict election. And it felt a bit like this one, actually, that kind of nobody really knew, nobody had any really strong idea about what would emerge from that conclave. And of course, it was an unprecedented or very rare event. The predecessor was still there, still alive, and had resigned. It wasn't dead, you know. So there was all that to take into account. So it felt much more up in the air. And I remember nobody was really talking about Bergoglio though. But about a day or 2 days before he was elected, a friend of mine who was a very good contact, a very good source, but wasn't somebody famous or important or in a significant position in the church at all, but was really well informed. And he was from a very, very conservative position. And he phoned me up and said in horror, you know, this Argentinian, you know, I'm appalled he's going to get elected. You've got to stop it. You've got to stop it. As if I could stop it, you know. But and I thought, what on earth is he talking about? And to my great shame, I kind of dismissed what he said completely because it just seemed completely out of the question that Bergoglio would get elected. And yet I think you possibly can take this story forwards because of Cormac's alleged influence in progressing that candidacy at in the congregations, which of course is where we are now. And it's all happening now. You know, it's probably it's kind of all being decided now.
That's right, Ruth. At the 2013 conclave, Cormac, the Cormac Murphy O'Connor, the previous Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, at that stage he was over 80, so he wasn't one of the voters. He had been a voter at the 2005 conclave, and he both at the congregations he knew that there's a move beginning towards Bergoglio of Buenos Aires. And Eleanor Curti, your predecessor and Maggie's predecessor as assistant editor and deputy editor, she was speaking to Cormac the day before, because as this year, the conclave starts with a mass. That time is on the Tuesday. They went into the conclave Tuesday after mass. They have one ballot on the Tuesday evening. And the next day, which this time the second day was a Wednesday, 2 ballots in the morning and 2 ballots after lunch. And on that 4th ballot of the second day, the 5th ballot overall, it was white smoke after 4 black smoke. And Eleanor was speaking to Cormac, I think that morning. And again, like all of us, or certainly like you were saying, Ruth, there's a few people mentioned Bergoglio. He was mentioned in the tablet as one of the, let's say, an outsider, a middle range candidate. And he was saying, just couldn't tell her who it was, but he's saying, you know, maybe they might go outside Europe, maybe Latin America could be their turn, just dropping hint after hint. And she just didn't pick it up. And then as soon as it was announced, Bergoglio famously came onto the loggia and said, Buenos Aires, and then the penny dropped. He'd been hinting all this time, but I never picked it up. So, you know, even sometimes these great journalists, when you're dangling this incredible coup under your nose, you don't always pick it up. So Bergoglio, you're right. That was one of those examples where, on the whole, he was on people's long list, but he was on very few people's short list, I would say, last time. So he was mentioned in the frame when you were doing your 25, 30 names, but he wasn't on that 2 or 3 that everybody was talking about. I think it was Scola, the Italian, was the guy that most people were talking about. And what happened was that Scola got his 35, 40 in the first ballot, a little bit less than had been expected. He was the Italian, the establishment guy, if you like. There's a few other runners on the 10s and 12s, but there wasn't the momentum there. And then the next day, the Buenos Aires Bergoglio started to pick up. And by the 3rd ballot, he hadn't quite got his 2/3, but it was clear that was the direction of travel. And though, because he wasn't that well known, and I think this is a big factor in a conclave, there wasn't a strong anti-Bergoglio camp. And when that's the case, people look around and somebody's got momentum, they tend to shift their vote onto this guy that seems to be where the Holy Spirit seems to be indicating that he might be the right person for this unspeakably difficult job. And very quickly, I think it was the fourth ballot, he was nearly up to 2/3. And then on the fifth ballot, second ballot on the Tuesday afternoon, he was well over. And what happens is the numbers are called out. And I remember Cormac telling me this, certainly about the conclave he was in, and everybody takes a big vow of secrecy, but this is what happened. Numbers get called out, the names get called out, and then everybody has their little scorecard and they tick them off and they're counting up. And it wasn't 79, then it was slightly fewer. I think it was, I can't remember what the exact number was. But as the tellers, as the scrutineers call out the names, you put the little tick next to their name. And then you can number the two. You've got 30, you've got 35, you've got 40. And in the room, 115 of them, whatever it was that time, 120, when it reached the number, and for this event time, it was for Ratzinger. When Cardinal Ratzinger got over the line, everybody in the room started clapping. And then they had to go on to the end, so all the names were listed. But that was the atmosphere in the room on that occasion. So everybody knows what the number to reach is. And when it's reached, everybody in the room knows and start looking towards the guy who's going to be the next pope, or going to be asked. That's the process. He's asked, will you be the next pope? And they then go on for that last 15, 20 votes are called out and the numbers are accumulated, are recorded. It must be incredibly exciting. As I've written this week in the tablet, which some of you might have had, and hopefully it'll arrive tomorrow morning or Saturday, I write a little column about this, about Cormac's presence at that 2005 election, where we ended up with Benedict XVI as one of the great adventures in his life. And of course, it must be so difficult for people like Vincent Nichols and Timothy Radcliffe, Arthur Roach, that of course, if you're a cardinal, like being the editor of the tablet, one of the great adventures is covering a conclave. So imagine the excitement, the thrill of actually being in a conclave. Who couldn't be looking forward and just blown away by the excitement of that? It must be fabulous. So, I'm not saying it's mixed feelings. Of course, the Holy Father dies and we weep and we're full of gratitude and joy and sadness, but a little bit, quite a big bit of this, I think, if you're a cardinal, and especially if you're 79 and you're going to be 80 later on this year, as both Vincent and Timothy are. They're both coming up, I think, August and November, December. A few months later, they're not going to experience this fantastic occasion. So they were, I'm sure, slightly mixed feelings about this. So Ruth, you were actually in Gatwick, weren't you, on that Tuesday morning when the news came through? You're on your way to Lourdes, and you had to was your bags packed and in the
my luggage was in the hold, and I was with the HCPT.
Yeah.
I was really sorry actually to miss that pilgrimage, and we hopefully next year, which is a big anniversary pilgrimage year for them, we'll do them justice with a nice feature in the tablet, and I'll manage to make it next year. But I was chatting to all the pilgrimage organisers and to our colleague Ellen Teague, who was actually also going over on the same flight. And unfortunately, because they couldn't find my bag for ages, the flight was then delayed for an hour while I tried to do my reverse ferret, as it were, and head back into London from Stansted Airport. And no, it was quite. And then from there, straight to the press conference with Cardinals Nichols and Radcliffe in Westminster.
That was on the Monday afternoon, wasn't it? And you got to, which was amazing.
Yeah.
And you took that famous video that is on YouTube and our most watched video ever, I think. And if anybody hasn't seen it, they really must go to the YouTube channel.
And it was very moving speaking to Nichols and Radcliffe so soon after the death of the Pope, when we'd all only just heard, and because they were so visibly distressed by it. And you saw their reaction and the huge impact and importance of this happening, and how it was playing out in them personally. And I thought it was very remarkable that they were as open as they were, and as generous as they were with their thoughts and their feelings about what happened next and the impact of this death of this much loved Pope.
Sure. Yeah, no, it was beautifully done. What was it that Vincent, the Cardinal, said something quite memorable and lovely? It was Easter Monday, wasn't it? Monday of Easter week, and
The Lord called him home.
Lord called him home.
After his own after the resurrection, he called him home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time to come home, mate.
Yeah.
No,
And Nichols also he had quite a gift of words actually with this one, because he also said something very moving about him being buried with his boots on,
yeah,
because in the coffin you could see when his body was laid out how he had those workaday brown boots on his feet, which right from the beginning of the papacy, when he eschewed the red shoes that previous popes have worn in recent times anyway, he was making that statement about his dress and what he would wear and about the tone of his papacy, and that was reflected right up until the very end.
yeah. No, I think the shoes were a fantastic icon of that Francis papacy, and they
I
were
think they were.
had
I think
prosthetic soles, didn't they, Maggie?
yeah, they were orthopedic shoes
Orthopedic.
because he had flat feet.
That's
Yeah.
right. And he used to get them from, well, he had the same cobbler in Buenos Aires for years. And then he found a guy, I think, in Rome who made them. So there are these little videos of him going in his Fiat to get his shoe measured up for shoes somewhere around down the corner, going into the shoe shop. It's gorgeous. So, Maggie, you actually the week earlier, I think, you were in Rome.
Yeah.
While the Pope was ailing. And one of the things you did was to visit the Sistine Chapel, where, of course, this fantastic event takes place, this extraordinary event. And how did you get in it? You have to queue for hours, don't you, to get in there? Or did you have some secret backstairs?
We did have a secret backstairs. So the reason for going to Rome was that I have a very, very old friend, Monsignor Brian Firm, who was the junior chaplain at Oxford when I was there this is like 40 years ago. He's now in charge of the Vatican finances, and he lives deep in the Vatican. In fact, he said to me, I really never go to Italy. So we met him in his office. We were just kind of swept straight past the queues and in through a kind of side entrance and into his amazing offices, which used to be the apartments of Gregory XIII. And then he took us to the Apostolic Palace, which has the Pope's private chapel with Michelangelo's last two paintings, which are literally never seen by the public. I mean, they're just not open to the public, and other empty chambers. But we could hear this kind of buzz in the background.
Yeah.
And eventually a Swiss guard loosed a bolt on a little tiny side door and pushed us into the Sistine Chapel, where there were like crap. I mean, it was like walking into a beehive. I've never seen so many people. So that's where they'll all be gathering next week. And it's slightly weird. I have been in there before. It is a little bit like going onto a film set because it's just so famous, the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, that you can hardly believe you're seeing the real thing. But
and how big is it, Maggie, just for people who have never been in there? I think some of them.
It's not, I mean, it is very big, but it's not, I can't quite, I'm no good at kind of saying so many meters or feet or whatever, but I mean, it's big, but it's not absolutely vast, I would say. And I think they begin in the chapel where there are the Michelangelo paintings, and then they go through into this is what Brian Firm explained, and then they go through into the Sistine Chapel where they sit. And I should think that the film of Conclave, well, one thing Brian told me was that he had given the novel Conclave to the Pope several years ago when it came out, and he'd enjoyed it very much, and they chatted about it. So I should think that it's quite similar to what you see in Conclave in terms of the way the cardinals sit, and The only major difference being that the people who made the film of Conclave decided to use a different colour red from the real kind of crimson that the cardinals wear. It's a sort of dark red in the film is completely different. They decided that would work better for them. Yeah.
Presumably most of us looking around, have most people seen Conclave? Some people are smiling, some people. This is my Kemi Badenoch moment when I have to admit that I've never seen Conclave, like some people have to admit they've never seen Adolescence. But it is, the DVD is in the post. But my understanding is, I mean, I've read the book, that if you have seen Conclave, the costumes might be slightly the wrong color and all the rest of it. But it's said to be, and some people don't like the film, regard it as a rather cynical exercise and makes everybody out to be acting rather cynically. Other people shrug their shoulders and say it's it's a great film, you know. But it is apparently pretty accurate, and certainly Robert Harris, in researching it, he Cormac, I know he went through the details with Cormac, and Cormac wrote him a letter to say congratulations, I thought it was a brilliant book, got all the details right. The ending, as we all know, without spoiling anything, is a bit of a long shot perhaps, but in terms of the actual details of the day-to-day, how it works, it's pretty reliable, I think.
Yeah.
I think that's true, isn't it?
It's pretty amazing timing. Yeah.
It was pretty amazing timing. Yeah.
The only thing I thought about it was in the film, or one of the things I thought about it was in the film. I don't know about the book, but they didn't really include anything of the congregations, which is where people say the real work is done.
Yes, that's
and
true.
Which are kind of happening at the moment.
Yeah.
And so I guess he must have just decided he wanted to get in what he could, and so keep it in an enclosed framework like that.
Yeah. I think that was part, wasn't it, of the filmmakers' desire for the film, was to communicate this atmosphere of a small, narrow, enclosed space, and to open it up in the way of congregations and getting on the bus and going into that particular hall they use for those would have detracted, I think, from that atmosphere of it being in a pressure cooker, which the film's so effective, I think. So I think we should talk a bit about Maggie and Ruth, and if Tabitha is in the picture, about what kind of Pope, and we're not pretending to be telling the Holy Spirit how to do its job, her job, his job, but the kind of Pope we've got a sense that maybe the world needs and the church needs. And is Tabitha there?
I'm here.
She is. Hello, Tabitha.
Hello.
Tabitha was in Rome last week for the funeral and did some fantastic work on social media. And again, if you've got access to these things, and not all of us do, you can see some lovely short videos of Tabitha talking to people, addressing the crowd. It's fantastic. So Tabitha, what are your feelings about the kind of papacy you'd like to see? And Tabitha, by the way, I should have said, is our journalist intern working with us for a year, and she's just been a fantastic gift to us all, as well as a delight in the office, and a fantastic professional journalist. So Tabitha, what are your feelings?
Yeah, so as Brendan mentioned, I was in Rome last weekend for Pope Francis' funeral. Originally supposed to be there for the canonization of Carlo Acutis, but since Francis died, everything was postponed. So I was there for the funeral and walked around, and there were so many young people in the crowds that had turned up either for the funeral or to process past Francis' coffin in the basilica itself, thronging with young people. And I think that was really a mark of Francis's papacy, was how approachable he was to young people. And I think whoever it becomes the new Pope, I'd really like to see him continue that approachability towards young people. I think young people were very important in the church. We're the generation who are there to carry things forward, and we want to make our own mark on the church. So I think welcoming young people is a really important thing for me personally.
Mm. And for you, did you get the impression that Francis did reach young people? Or as other people sometimes say, that the Francis style of papacy was not precisely what was drawing young people to the church?
I think Francis was there almost as a welcoming figurehead to Catholicism. I mean, I'm a cradle Catholic, but I do have friends who are converts, and in speaking to them, they felt very welcomed by Pope Francis's compassion and welcome for all people. And I think from there, from having that figurehead, they began to learn more about the faith, with Francis as a starting point.
Oh.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And I suppose you were you were in that category of cradle Catholic, wasn't sort of put off or didn't find, because there's so many things about that attracted you to the church that are nothing whatever. For a lot of us, the Pope is the parish priest, your chaplain at university, your friends, and the Pope is just part of a much bigger picture. But he certainly for you, he was part of the pull rather than part of the push.
Yeah, I mean, I said this in my newsletter a few weeks ago, but Francis was kind of the transitional pope for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but I was 10 when he was elected. So he was really my pope throughout my adolescence and becoming an adult. So he really left a mark on me, and I think especially young people our age.
Yeah.
I can't really remember much of Benedict, let alone, John Paul II. So he really left a mark in that transitional period, becoming a young Catholic, and then also feeling encouraged to, when I got to university, wanting to go to my chaplaincy, wanting to go to mass, wanting to go to adoration, feeling that it was a very welcoming space. Yeah.
Was there something particular about Francis? Was it that traditional spirituality combined with this social justice message? Was there one or two things in particular about Francis that you remember?
Yeah, I think his social justice, especially, he had lived experience, living in Argentina, and I think that's quite unique. And he really had a voice for those who he gave a voice to those who couldn't speak out, and I thought that was he really embodied what it meant to be Catholic. He really embodied that universality, which was really important, I think.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, I'm going to ask Ruth and Maggie about their feelings, but while you're talking about young people, when Benedict came to England, and some of us will remember this, I'm always got to remember that a lot of us won't remember it because we weren't born or were very young or whatever. It's probably ages ago now, but to me it seems like last weekend. When Benedict came to England for those few days, one of the things he did, and I think it was when he went to St. Mary's University in Roehampton, he had a specific meeting and address with young people. And this was Benedict, the great kind of intellectual scholar whose books are really quite demanding. All the rest of it, everybody says he was incredibly clever, marvelous encyclicals, great teaching, but you probably have to read them once or twice to get the hang of them. And he gave this lovely short talk to young people about the faith and about the beauty of the faith. And it was really magnificent. I was astonished by just how Benedict, shy, scholarly, could have that connection with young people. It must be on video somewhere, but it was a great occasion. I remember it. It made me think he can do it. Benedict can connect with young people, even without any kind of gesticulation. He's very quiet. He's English. His written English was fine, but his spoken English, maybe this was part of it. You had to lean forward to listen to what he was saying. It was quite quiet. And it was enthralling. It was really very, very good. So, Ruth, what kind of Pope do you think the world needs? and the church needs, or what's the job description, again, without being too presumptuous?
Well, it is
as
difficult.
we all know, it's impossible, don't we?
And it's where we're all trying to read between the lines, really, and read the runes of what's coming out of Rome at the moment and other parts of the world, what people are saying. When before the tablet, a few weeks ago, as you know, I went to interview Cardinal Michael Fitzgerald, who's one of our 4 cardinals in this country. But at 87, he's the only one of the 4 who's too old to vote in the conclave. Nevertheless, he even wrote a letter to the tablet, I think, saying that he was adamant he was going to go to the congregations, where, sure enough, he is now taking part in all the conversations before the conclave. And he's a very influential and well-respected cardinal in the church with a lot of international experience. And I said to him, who would be your favourite candidate as Pope, thinking that I would get equivocation, and that he wouldn't want to commit himself. But to my amazement, really, he came just straight out with it and said Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines. And some people see him as a Francis Mark II, but actually he's actually very conservative doctrinally in many respects. And I think that he isn't the same as Francis. He wouldn't be an automatic Francis person, although Pope Francis really did like him. He's very loved in the Philippines. In fact, in the Philippines, people there are quite worried that he's being so lauded. I think he's number 2 with the bookmakers at the moment, that they've asked people to stop talking about him as a papabile, because and he himself has been very discreet, and not saying much about it at all, if anything. So, but I do think myself that the church does need somebody like him. But on the Vatican website today, it's quite interesting. They've posted an interview with a Dominican, and he is using repeatedly this word unity. Now, there is this battle, as everyone here will know, going on in the church at the moment between progressives and conservatives. And there are people, because although Pope Francis didn't really change much doctrinally, he did make it more possible to slightly be more relaxed about some of the rules, maybe. And he certainly changed the tone of the church quite dramatically. And I think that there's this battle going on between the progressives, who want to see more done and are disappointed that Francis didn't go further in the areas like women's ordination and gay blessings. And then there are the more conservatives who want consolidation, stability, and maybe a return to a much more traditional papacy, someone who lives in the papal apartments and who dons the normal papal regalia and that kind of thing. So my reading of it is that the word unity is associated with the latter, with the more conservative side, because unity, throughout my writing as a religious affairs correspondent, unity has always been used by the conservative side of the debate in the Anglican communion, which has been riven, as we know, by debates over women's ordination and homosexuality throughout the last few decades. And unity has always been the rallying call. We mustn't fracture the church's unity. And then on the other side, you get we want diversity, but we want diversity, and we want more progression, more progress, and modernity, to modernize. So I found it very interesting that on the Vatican website itself, you had this repeated use of the word unity. So to me, that is a definite straw in the wind of what we might be looking at coming out of the conclave.
And was there something specific? Why do you think Fitzgerald, who knows Tagle, obviously, has worked with him and met him, and he was, as you say, was fascinating. This is part of your brilliance as an interviewer, Ruth, but you got out of him this one name. And was it partly about personality and who he was, as much as the things he was saying, his position, if you like, his take on the certain topics and so on? Of course, for Fitzgerald, interfaith dialogue was a major thing, isn't it? So presumably Tagle was supportive of Fitzgerald when it came to friendship and reaching out with our Jewish and Muslim neighbours in particular. And of course, in the Philippines and Manila, I think interfaith relations are vital there. So that must have been part of it. What were the kind of things you think that made for Michael Fitzgerald for Tagley, particularly.
I'm sure his doctrinal soundness is part of it.
Yeah.
Because I think there is a view that that he is pretty solid. I mean, to the point where he's criticised by some progressives for being too conservative in some areas, and so he's very solid there, and or sound, as people like to say. And I think that is a very strong point in his favour for a lot of people. But he's very likable, and he's very, very clever man, and I think wanted to be a doctor before he went into seminary. You know, he's really all there. He would be the first Asian pope if he became pope, and he kind of can work it at every level, right down from a pastoral level right up to being a person on the international stage. He has, I think, the required attributes in so many respects. So a really gifted man. Nevertheless, obviously it's not a done deal, and there are others there as well. So one of my favourites actually is obviously, along with half of the world now, they've all discovered he exists, is Cardinal Pizzaballa. And he's very young, he's only 60. So I think he might be too young. John Paul II, I think, was only 58, though, was he, when he was elected? And I think Pizzaballa, he's made such a strong impression as the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, but he's an Italian, and I know the Italians. There's a strong push for an Italian Pope again, and so he kind of would tick all the boxes really of having an international perspective, but also being an Italian.
Sure.
But then, and of course, there's Secretary of State Parolin. I think it's been nearly a century since a Secretary of State was elected Pope, though. And Parolin, I think he was slightly unwell today. Not critically ill or anything like that. But one thing, when they were electing Ratzinger, and there was this big move to try and stop him from the progressives, a band of cardinals got together. And that's when Bergoglio first came to the fore, although obviously he didn't get elected that time. But Bergoglio realised that he was going to be, you know, his name was being pushed up there. When a cardinal went up to him and said, "We hear you've only got one lung. Is this true?" And he said, "No, it's not true. I've got, I had half a lung removed, you know, when I got an infection when I was in seminary." And he said, but he realised then what was happening, and he said, "But I'm going to vote for Ratzinger," which he did. And now, in fact, Tom Kington, who was the Times' correspondent in Rome, and is the Times' correspondent in Rome, tells this story about that. And so I think that shows the kind of politicking that can go on, and it shows the factors that have to be taken into consideration. People want to know, even if they don't want a particularly young pope, they do want one who's going to be able to stay the course a little bit. And when Francis was elected, you know, years later, he was convinced he wasn't going to last that long. And in fact, I think he went on for much longer than he had initially thought he would.
No.
So despite only having half a lung, you know, the fears about his health were really pretty unfounded, you know, because he remained amazingly robust, really, right up until the end, as we all saw on Easter Day, you know, determinedly out there, still doing his job.
Sure. I think the last Secretary of State to be elected was Bocelli, 1939.
Yeah, nearly a century ago.
And he was elected on about the third ballot or something, because he was sort of running the church, not too unlike a Parolin sort of scenario. They all knew him, and he was seen as a safe pair of hands, sort of a combination of continuity with competence, that kind of thing.
And it's the same thing with Parolin, isn't it, really? I think there's much of that going on at the moment, and he might well be a strong choice, you know, given the need for stability and consolidation in the present age.
Sure. Yeah. Maggie, what are your thoughts again
I can't.
Well,
I can't pretend to
who are
have,
we? I realise all that, but
yeah, I can't pretend to have any kind of inside track on it. From our sort of compilation of runners and riders, I love the sound of Kikuchi, who spent 8 years
that marvellous.
working in a village in Ghana with no electricity and no water and no car, and loved it. I think he sounds very promising, but I know nothing more about him. But I would say I asked this friend Brian Firm in the Vatican, who worked very closely with Francis. I said, "What in a nutshell was he like?" And he said, "He was kind, he was generous, and he was very, very tough." And I would think that those three things, one would hope, would be in any new pope. And the thing that I would love, I was very moved by the piece we're running this week by Andrew Wilson about what he would look for in a new pope. Well, he's not a Catholic, and what he's looking for is a spiritual director for the whole world. I'm sort of dying for a pope that's going to reach way beyond the Catholic Church. That would be my big wish.
Say those three words again that Father Brian just summed up.
Kind, generous, and very, very tough. Yeah. He said you really wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of him. He really, he wasn't a kind of pushover.
Sure.
As he obviously couldn't possibly have been to have done everything he did.
Yeah.
But there's a sort of, it's easy to think if you just saw him up on the thing saying Buonasera and stuff, he was just kind of cozy figure. Well, he was a great deal more than that, I think.
Yeah. Maggie, about less than a year ago, you've done it a couple of times, but you interviewed Timothy Radcliffe.
Yeah.
An interview with him a couple of years ago, and then since he was made a cardinal,
yeah,
the Pope, and that happened in December. I think you interviewed him a few weeks before that.
Yeah.
And he is sort of whispered. He's obviously much loved and clearly was highly thought of. He was the man that the Pope invited 2 years running to give the pre-synod retreat for 2 or 3 days. So that would mean that he's known by everybody. To some extent, they've sat at his feet, if you like. He'll be a senior, wise figure who I know his talks were, some said, were the kind of spiritual motor. He became the Gandalf of the synod process or whatever. Hugely respected.
I know him way back from when I was at university, and he used to sometimes come and give the Sunday sermon at the chaplaincy.
Yeah.
And I mean, the place, even in that's 40 years ago, it would be absolutely packed out. He's got enormous charisma and a kind of palpable, to my mind, a kind of palpable holiness. But his health is very, very poor. So he suffered from cancer of the jaw. He's had this enormous operation to take bone out of his leg and put it into his jaw. He's been told that at any moment it could be curtains, and literally at any moment. I just think because of that, he's a bit unlikely to be in the running.
No.
Much so, wonderful though he would be in all kinds of ways,
sure.
Especially in his refusal to wear any of the kind of gear. Yeah.
Yeah. There was one or two people, as I noticed, had their hands up. And because of the 160, 170, I think I saw earlier, if you have a question or a query or a comment, or just want to tell us to stop talking, you could put it into this little thing at the bottom. There's this row of icons, and one of them says chat. And at the moment, everyone is so enthralled by Maggie and Ruth that they're not wanting to interrupt them by putting up a chat message. But if you do want to chip in or ask a question, it's a chance for us to learn a bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about possible candidates. And if there are people with particular insights or things that we're missing, it would really help us as well to have that kind of feedback from people here. My own thoughts are, I mean, I think everybody who's thought about this, and Ruth and Maggie have said the same thing. The key thing that we all want to see, the world wants to see, the church wants to see, is simply somebody who, like the parish priest, that we want somebody who can preach the gospel, who can show us that message of mercy and solidarity, the dignity and preciousness of every human being, and help us to show us our task is not just to huddle together and sneer at the world, but to listen to it and to go out and to convert it, to give us the strength and the good humour to be missionaries, so that together we can make the world slightly different rather than just.
I think Andrew Wilson puts it really well, given that he's not somebody who necessarily wears his heart on his sleeve, and as I say, he's not a Catholic, but he said in his piece in this week's issue, the world is hungry for the central truths of Catholic Christianity, that God manifested himself to the human race in the person of Jesus, and Jesus left behind an eternal token of his presence.
I think one of the lessons of the funeral was this extraordinary event that we saw last week, and all the people around the world who they couldn't put the words to it. They couldn't quite figure out what it was that was pulling them to it. But I got a sense of beyond curiosity. It was a little whisper in people's ear that there's just more to this, to being a human being, than what we know, busyness and work, and we can't quite, just something beyond, something else happening, and we would say the most interesting things are happening, the things that we're not just obsessed by and running after.
Even seeing Trump and Zelensky with their heads together chatting before the funeral, that looked to me like something more than was happening in Washington. There was something that they were doing it in that context that looked, I don't know what they said.
Sure.
I wouldn't be terrible. Well, who knows? But it looked to me like something a bit moving.
Yeah.
I felt that exactly, Maggie.
Yeah.
I hope we're right.
Yeah. I mean, the number of people I spoke to, and again, they didn't know, even themselves, they couldn't quite find the words to express it. And we all know the shameful things that have gone on in the church, things that we're embarrassed by and have to be asked for forgiveness for. And I think people know that story now. And people often talked about the odd optics and all these men and the funny costumes and all kinds of things like that troubled people, if you like. But beyond it, there was something that enthralled or fascinated, or just some sign that the way, the values of the world that they just take for granted and live by, just hesitate. There's something more to life than this. And what the church is, I think this is why it's such an opportunity, if you like, is that when it comes to that institutional side of that spirituality, that religion, that so many people hunger for, that although there are all kinds of places and institutions and organizations and buildings where that is expressed and real in the world, I think it's true when it comes to this religious instinct, that the place where it is most evident and just there as a presence, as a building, as an institution, it is in this weird, crazy thing, like the Roman Catholic Church. And that event that death of a pope was somehow, I think it showed me, and he reminded us of, even in some ways it's past its sell-by, whatever it is, people say it's completely irrelevant. It's just how relevant it still is, and has the power, the soft power that's still there in that.
You felt the sort of, because one is so used as a Catholic simply to being battered by the and having to keep rather quiet about being Catholic and that kind of thing. And at the point of during that funeral, I thought, wow, we can feel proud to be Catholics. now in this moment, and because of Francis, we can be proud to be Catholics, and that's not an everyday thing.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And if you had somebody with the, whatever it is, the ability to communicate, to get over that precious message that people want to hear about solidarity and dignity of human beings and mercy, everybody wants to be forgiven. They always will do. There'll always be that place for mercy in people's lives, that hunger for it. And I think Ruth made this really important point about the talk that there is the desire in some quarters for unity. And I have to, it's a nice word to use and it sounds great. But when our blessed Lord was sending out the apostles to convert the world, preach the gospel, he didn't say to them, and the most important thing to remember is unity. Quite the opposite. That message is always going to be met with opposition and distaste inside the church and in the world. And as I was saying at the end of the piece I wrote this week, it's I don't think we should worry if the new Pope might stir up disturbance, unrest, and division. I think we should worry if he doesn't.
Mm.
And he's going to get idolized and he's going to be wearing a crown of thorns, and people inside the church and outside of it will be mocking him and scoffing him. And if that doesn't happen, there's probably something a bit wrong. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to talk about names, but when
we do have quite a few questions in the chat box, Brendan.
Oh, we have now, have we?
So
oh, I've got two. I've got two here.
Well, I'd just run through them. We've got Mary who said, I'd like to hear more about who the cardinals are and who will be attending the conclave.
Yep. And next other question?
Brother Ray Lyons, I think we've answered that one. Given the role of Timothy Radcliffe, do you think he would be a candidate? I think we've done that. Paul Doherty said, when it comes time for questions, could you ask the team what they think will happen to the synodality agenda? Will the working groups report or fizzle?
Yeah, sure. So I think we've mentioned, Ruth's mentioned by name some of the candidates, and my own feeling would be in terms of who I'd like, the names who I'd really like to be considered and talked about. The two would be, I went to an Augustinian school, and there hasn't been an Augustinian in OSA Pope for about 900, 800 years, but there's a fantastically gifted, I think, pretty charismatic, proven administrative material. He's American, which makes him a bit of a long shot, but he's called Robert Prevost, OSA, and he is in charge of the Congregation for Bishops, I think, and a regular confidant close to the Pope. I think he'd be continuity plus efficiency and give us something a bit different. And of course, the other person I absolutely love, I think he'd be fantastic, would be Michael Cherney, who's Canadian, fantastic on refugees and migrants, a wonderful speaker. I think he might have even spoken in one of our webinars a few years ago. He's a terrific guy. He'd be fantastic.
The one whose petrol cross is made of wood from the boats of the migrant. Yeah.
But he is a Jesuit, which everybody says we're not going to have another Jesuit following a Jesuit. But anyway, they're the two I'd love. And I'd also like, I think a bit like Ruth, and the bookie's favourite is Parolin. And as we've said before, everybody says you shouldn't take any notice of bookies, but bookies aren't always wrong. And I think Parolin, everybody knows Parolin. He's the guy that you meet when you go to Rome, Secretary of State. They've all had dealings with him. Everything I know about Parolin, there's a couple of people here, I think, who have actually met him and worked with him to some extent, will vouch for both his kindness and his efficiency. He's one of these people who is a good administrator, got a tidy diary, does get things done, and actually is personally very companionable, a very good, loyal friend to people. So I think he's got the qualities that might give us both continuity and kindness and toughness, the things that Maggie spoken about. But we don't know. But that's That's Pietro Carolin. I think he's a name. If you're going down to Paddy Power tomorrow to put the fiver on, he might be worth a flutter. Final thing, Brother Ray mentioned synodality. And if there's one concern, we are coming up to the end now, but in all the addresses, typically that wonderful, I think, homily by Cardinal Ray, 91-year-old Cardinal Ray at the funeral, again, it was a kind of a rehearsal of all the points that are associated with the Francis papacy, one after other, all the things he said, all the things we know him for, but no mention of synodality. And if I have got one fear, it's that what the new papacy might bring us is all the parts of Francis to do with outward looking, mission, social justice, all the rest of it. But I think given who they are, I think quite a lot of them, the mood would be, but let's leave the structures of things in our hands. We can take care of these things. That's a very human kind of instinct that I fear might dominate the discussions. That would be my response. So, but just to remind people, there's a full list in the paper this week of the people we think are papabili, and online over the next few days there'll be a much longer list, not quite comprehensive, but certainly 80, 90, 100 of the cardinals of those 100 and whatever the number is, 133 who will be in the conclave. They'll all be, all the key people will be fully listed, and you can access them online. Just last thing, I think the number is 133, and you might think the number to bear in mind is the 2/3, which is 79. The new Pope will need 79 of those cardinals to vote for him to be elected Pope. But perhaps the most significant, more significant number is 54. Why 54? 54 is 1/3 plus 1. If there are 54 cardinals who are against you, they can simply withhold the vote. That's what's needed to block somebody. So even if you have somebody much liked, comfortable majority, if you've got 54 who are agreed that they're not going to vote for you, they're going to have to look else. So those are the two. That's a big number to bear in mind. 79 and 54. Amanda, are we out of time?
We're out of time, I'm afraid. Really,
been really great.
Guide.
I apologise to anybody who asked a question who we didn't respond. We've done our best.
I think we got through most of them, Brendan, and I was looking at them, and as they were coming in, you were answering them. So I think all is well. Thank you once again to all of the panel. It's been an absolute delight seeing you all, for Maggie, for Ruth, Brendan, Tabitha, all the team that pull these webinars together. It's been an absolute delight. On behalf of myself and the rest of the Tablet team, we'd just like to wish you a very good evening. Good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. What a joy.